introduce at this stage our second keynote, a fantastic scholar who is rapidly becoming a very good friend, and her name or their name is Melissa Wilcox. And Melissa is Associate Professor of Religion and Gender Studies, so a very close match to my chair here in Comparative Religion, Gender and Sexuality at Whitman College, where sorry Melissa, I don't know where that is. Is that in the West Coast or?
It's in Washington State.
Washington State, near Seattle?
No, as far as you can get.
Spokane.
Which is why I live in Seattle.
Right, so because I lived in Seattle for a while, but I don't know the college. Professor Wilcox has a multidisciplinary background that ranges from undergraduate degree in biology through a master's degree in women's studies and religion to an interdisciplinary doctoral training in the sociology and history of religion, sexuality and gender at the again very prestigious Divinity School at the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a PhD in 2000. Melissa has spent a career investigating religious and spiritual beliefs, practices and identity in LGBTQ communities, both in the US and internationally. In addition to publishing numerous articles on gender, sexuality, and religion, Melissa has written and edited the following books: Religion in Today's World, 2012, which is an important undergraduate textbook, and the award-winning 2009 book Queer Women and Religious Individualism. This is a very quite of a significant contribution both to theory and practices of LGBTQ women. Another book, earliest book, Coming Out in Christianity. Yeah. Maybe now Melissa is coming out of Christianity, I don't know. And Melissa also edited for ABC Clio this voluminous series, 2 volumes I think, Sexuality in the World's Religions, in 2003. Now, Professor Wilcox is currently working on a book on the topic Melissa will be presenting, that is the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which most of you will know. For those who don't know and can't stay to the talk, that is a queer subversion of Christianity that is, you could say, that is very present around pride and queer events globally. So it's a burlesque, almost maybe. Melissa will hate me, probably I say the wrong things, but if I'm correct, a burlesque, both serious and not so serious subversion of Christianity. This is a very interesting case of spirituality. So here's Melissa Wilcox and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence.
From one set of bearded nuns to another. Doesn't get any better than that as far as I'm concerned. While I'm bringing my slides up, let me just say briefly that one thing that might be helpful that is sort of in translating religious studies to fields that aren't used to working with it is to know that one of the most important principles of the field is to take religion as we find it, to take it as we see it, to not try to go beneath the surface in ways that we often call reductionist, to say, well, actually what happened is that it was a bad trip, or there's something going on with you psychologically, or it's about the economic conditions, but say, in fact, this is the worldview in which these people exist. This is the worldview in which they are navigating their lives. What does that mean to them? Not, well, why is that the worldview? What went wrong with them? But instead, here it is. This is where we're at. Let's start there. That's our beginning point in religious studies. Now, what do we do with that? What can we learn from starting with that worldview? So really this, depending on where you take it from, where you go with this, really, this is then a perspective that acknowledges, at the very least, the existence of multiple ways of seeing the world and doesn't try to interpret all of them through a single one. and if you take it more radically, acknowledges the existence of multiple realities. So there is a reality, even if it's not ours today, in which you can wake up in the morning and go, oh shit, right? There is a reality, and it is these texts that Carol is working with. And so likewise, there is a reality in which being a gay male nun makes perfect sense, and that's where I want to begin today. I want to start actually with a little trip back in time to a short film that was made in 1981.
For centuries, tradition has been the very cornerstone of the Catholic Church. But as times change, so may traditions. These sisters have devoted themselves to both tradition and change, incorporating in their lives a unique blend of the old and the new. We join them now as they prepare for their morning service.
You get down on your knees, fiddle with your rosaries, bow your head with great respect and genuflect, genuflect, genuflect. Do whatever steps you want if you have cleared them with the pontiff. Everybody say his own, Kyrie eleison, doing the Vatican right. Step into that small confessional. They're the guy who's got religion. I'll tell you if your sin's original. If it is, try playing it safer. Drink the wine and chew the wafer. 2, 4, 6, 8. Time to transubstantiate. Get down upon your knees. Fiddle with your rosaries. Bow your head with great respect and genuflect, genuflect, genuflect. Finger cross on your abdomen. When in Rome, do like a Roman. Ave Maria. Gee, it's good to see you. Getting ecstatic and sort of dramatic and doing the Vatican right. First you get down on your knees, fiddle with your rosaries, bow your head with great respect and genuflect, genuflect, genuflect. Do whatever steps you want.
So I let that run for a minute so that you could see the names of the sisters who starred in this: Sister Missionary Position, Sister Homo Fellatio, Reverend Mother, Sister Helen Damnation, Saint Thomas Bernina, I don't know, and Father Mother, the female priest with the bagel. I have said for quite some time, and this is in part affected by the research group that I trained with at UC Santa Barbara, which I fondly refer to as Chicago with surfboards. Very similar approach to the study of religion as the University of Chicago, but on the ocean. I've long said that I get interested in religion when it makes you kind of slap your forehead and say, what the fuck just happened? So at one point in time, that was, how on earth are people queer and Christian? And now it's, in recent years, it's been the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and I am eventually, did I just close my PowerPoint? No. I'm eventually moving on, when this book is done, to looking at the use of religious imagery and roles in BDSM practice and queer erotica. So what makes me smack my forehead and go, what the fuck, is getting more and more radical, but I love that. So that's the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the San Francisco house in 1981. So people who are very clearly presenting as male in traditional Roman Catholic habits, and at this point in time in San Francisco, in plain face. Today, upon first encountering Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, such as the ones in this picture who gathered in London a few years ago for a memorial service for the victims of hate crime, people often ask them what they do or who they are. Their standard answer is that they're 21st century queer nuns. A more detailed answer might be that they're people of all genders and sexualities, although they're still predominantly cisgender gay men, who dedicate themselves to the mission of the promulgation of universal joy and the expiation of stigmatic guilt, and who spend their free time, this is a volunteer group, this is not a full-time thing, although some of them would laugh and contradict me, who spend their free time doing activist and community service work, mostly in queer communities, on 4 continents and in 10 countries around the globe. There are, of course, many other questions to be asked about the sisters, which is why I'm writing an entire book on them, but today I want to focus on one in particular, and that's the question of what exactly it means to be a queer nun. So what I'm talking about today is drawn from a book that I am in the process of writing. This is going to become chapter 2 in a few weeks. It's based on 5 years of research with the sisters on all 4 continents. I shouldn't quite say on South America and Australia via Skype, but I've worked with a number of houses in Europe and North America in person. So just for the quick obligatory sociological summary of the research methods, a lot of this research is participant observation. I also did interviews one-on-one in focus groups and also oral history interviews with the surviving founders and also founders of houses in different countries and on different continents as well. There's also archival research that comes into this. So the participant observation work is very much in the background of the talk that I'm going to be giving today. You'll see a number of archival images as well. But in thinking through what the sisters do and why, I'm also relying today especially heavily on what they say about what they do. So you'll see a lot of interview quotes, which I'll also read through. So you'll hear a lot of sisters' voices today, channeled, of course, through my own. You'll also hear a lot, as you have already gathered from the film, of rather extraordinary and often sexually suggestive names. And just so you know, there is one sexually explicit drawing. It's not anatomically explicit, and I'll let you know when I'm about to click over to that drawing. Gender pronouns as well are rather complex in the sisters, so bear with me as I switch pronouns, sometimes for the same person, sometimes mid-sentence, and occasionally get them wrong, which I regularly do because different houses use pronouns differently and I have to switch on the fly, and we'll try to correct myself when I mess up with that. So, what exactly does it mean to be a queer nun? Here is one image that might offer more questions than answers. It comes to me from Sister Mary R. Slickton Old Lace of the Sydney House, who explained to me how this image came about. And this is a quote from my interview with him. So he says, the gay Mardi Gras, I think he actually means the gay games, came to Australia in 2002, I think it was. We had funding and support from the Mardi Gras Association to have the nuns on a range of condoms and sexual lubricant, which was a great promotion at the time. Everyone wanted to pick at the condoms with the gay male nuns on them. So I laughed and I said, oh, literally like printed on the condoms? And he said, we were printed on them, that's right. There were 5 sisters of us involved, of which I was one of them. And the photography was heavenly. It was lit from underneath, so all our faces were glowing with angelic light. Now, Sister Kaminya Rass, I'll show you how that's pronounced, how that's spelled, of the London House of Common Sluts, explained to me why she considers herself a nun. And she said, like traditional nuns, we take certain vows. So you're all laughing, and now listen to the seriousness that's also underlying here. This is part of what I think is fascinating. So she says, like traditional nuns, we take certain vows. They may not be the traditional vows that the Catholic Church might promote because we certainly don't do chastity. However, we take vows, we take them seriously. I think the order in our house has an expectation that having made these promises, that they're promises to the community, that you respect and you keep those. The habit is a symbol of the responsibility we have to the community, both in the messages that we're getting over and in the sense of fun and the parody that goes with it. I just realized I forgot to set my timer, so I'm going to start that. But the parody is a wonderful thing because people will talk. I think people identify with the habit as for what it symbolizes and the religious connotation. But because you're clearly not a female nun, particularly in the LGBT community, people will come and talk to you about things that they won't talk to other people about. They also realize very early on from talking to us that we respect them as people for who they are, so they can talk to us. So yeah, no, I consider myself to be a secular 21st century nun. In the face of critics who say they're mocking nuns, some sisters reply, as Sister Maya Punani did in the passage quoted here, "I'm not making fun of anybody. I celebrate nuns for the work they do. We're doing it the same way they do, we just look different. And we're not making fun. If anything, what's the saying about the sincerest form of flattery?" And I said, "Imitation." And she said, "Imitation." But it's not just imitation and flattery. There's parody here as well. So this paradox is what led me to the concept of serious parody, which is the focus of what I want to talk about today. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll try to keep it a little shorter, I'll explore what, in my opinion, serious parody is and the specific form it takes within the worldwide order of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. The larger argument in this chapter, which I'm not going to have the time to make today, is that this draws off of a longer tradition of performative activism, but in bringing the seriousness in along with the parody. We're familiar with parodic activism through Queer Nation, through the Gay Liberation Front, a lot of Lesbian Avengers. Other names are going to keep popping up, but we're familiar with parodic activism, particularly in the queer community. But this idea of bringing parody and absolute dead seriousness together at the same time, I think, is something more unique. And so I'm trying to think about, why is it happening in this context? What is it useful for? How else might it be used? Has it been used elsewhere that I'm not picking up on yet? That's sort of the broader context. Here I want to look, for you today, I want to look very specifically at serious parody just in the sisters. So first and foremost, and this is Sister Chrissy Fiction, the nun who got nailed, of the Order of Benevolent Bliss in Portland, Oregon. So first and foremost, my argument is that the particular form of serious parody enacted by the sisters is effective specifically because it combines two tropes, particularly I think visual tropes, that are familiar and at least partly positively valenced in the communities that the sisters serve. On the one hand, that of the drag queen, and on the other hand, that of the nun. And I think in this image of Sister Chrissy, you can see both of those coming out. In combination, then, these two images or these two tropes create the figure of a nurturing, selfless, sexy, sassy, and ultimately very queer nun. From the drag queen side, especially skag drag or genderfuck drag, and female-bodied high femme drag, that's where the sisters really get the parody side, I think, of this serious parody. They also draw sexuality, playfulness, and recognition as part of the queer community. Again, I think that comes especially through the nuns that engage in more of a skag drag presentation. So this, in a nutshell, then, is the performatively queer part of queer nuns. Again, as you can see with this image of Sister Chrissy, genderfuck in the sisters is often immediately visible. If it's not visible, it's often, because it's often very difficult to I'm hesitating over my words here for a reason. It's often very difficult to sort of gender the persona underneath the nun. And the reason I'm hesitating is that often the sister persona has a different gender than what sisters call their secular persona. So when people are trying to gender a sister, what they're really trying to do is figure out who the persona behind the sister is, and that is already a little bit of a deviation from how the sisters think about and see themselves. So if the genderfuck, though, isn't immediately visible, it's often audible with a male-bodied nun as soon as that person begins speaking. And Archmother Johanna of the Berlin House even speaks of the sisters as what she calls the bearded handmaidens of the divine. But female-bodied sisters enact their own form of genderfuck, sometimes unintentionally, as Sister Nadia and Wilda explains, and Sister Nadia is from the Abbey of St. Joan in Seattle, Washington. She told me, when I was a novice, we were at Our Place, and that's a mixed-gender gay bar in Seattle, doing an event, and this guy came up and scooped up my breasts and said, "These are great." And I was stunned for a second, and then I said, "Thank you." And as soon as he heard a girl voice, he dropped them as quickly as he had picked them up and said, "I'm sorry, sister. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." But he was so shocked, and he thought that all of the sisters were biologically male. And I said, "We like to surprise you." And the rest of the night, that poor guy was like, "I'm sorry, sister." I'm like, "Please, don't worry about it." Sister Nadia is not the only female-bodied sister who's told me a story like this. So the drag playfulness parody piece. This is an image from a series of greeting cards that the San Francisco House made, again, fairly early on in their history. This is the sister who is best known as Sister Vish. The name that she was known by, has been known by for most of her time in the order, is Sister Vicious Power Hungry Bitch. She now goes by Sister Vishnu, and she originally took the name Sister Ardnarishvara, which is a reference to a multi-gendered Hindu image. Let's keep the story short so I can keep going. So the first manifestation of the sisters involved habits that had been permanently borrowed from an order in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Roman Catholic nuns order. They were retired habits and had been borrowed under the auspices of a performance of The Sound of Music, but they were actually borrowed by a drag troupe that was performing in Iowa City. And then Sister Vish, in fact, the person who became Sister Vish, brought them to San Francisco. So one Easter Saturday in 1979, 3 roommates, bored, decided, hey, let's put on these nuns' outfits and go for a walk through the Castro district, which is the gay district in San Francisco. One of them, who became Sister Vish, was carrying a machine gun, a toy machine gun, and so this greeting card is kind of a reenactment of that. Another example of the playfulness and parody, and here's the sexually explicit drawing that I promised you was coming up, is the cover of the Playfair pamphlet. This pamphlet was produced in the early 1980s as the first, sometimes Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York claims to be the first, in fact it was the sisters, the first sex-positive, safer sex manual specifically directed at gay men. It's been revised more recently in 1999, and then the London House did a revision in, I think, the early to mid 2000s to be more, to be inclusive of all bodies and all forms of sex. The Playfair pamphlet I find actually chilling to read because AIDS hadn't been named yet. It lists Kaposi's sarcoma and talks about, kind of this gay cancer that we don't know anything about, and it just makes the hair stand up on my arms every time I read it. We had Florence, I have to say this carefully because I often get the names crossed. We had Florence Nightingale yesterday. The Playfair pamphlet was put together in part by Sister Florence Nightmare. Also known as Bobby Campbell, the first public face of AIDS in the U.S., but also a sister of Perpetual Indulgence and a public health nurse. Founders like Sister So Am I, formerly Sister Missionary Position, so you saw him, much younger in the film that I showed, and this is Sister So Am I on the top left here. And Sister Vish, so this is a more recent image of Sister Vish on the bottom right, very clearly acknowledge the drag aspect, and you can see that in these quotes from the interview. So from Sister Vish, what you're wearing is the tool to do the work, and it's a Catholic habit. It's nun, drag nun. It's just the truth, I'd say. Sister So Am I, it seems to me very appropriate that people with a drag queen bent would say, and here he means of Roman Catholic nuns' habits, oh, this is fabulous drag that needs to keep being perpetuated. And how do you justify perpetuating that when these women, and here he means Roman Catholic nuns, have said, oh, it hampered us and we have to discard it to work in the world? So this is an ongoing question that particularly sisters with Roman Catholic background, not all of them have, they're pretty much pretty much match the general population in terms of how many of them come from a Catholic background. A few are still practicing Catholics, most aren't. But Sister So Am I spent some time in the seminary before being hounded out for his sexual orientation. And so you do see them engaging particularly strongly with this question of what is our relationship to Roman Catholic nuns. And I will come back to that as well. Sister Rowena of the Sydney House, and this is an image of the Sydney sisters, captures the parodic element, I think, quite neatly with her comparison of the Australian order's traditional habits, which are usually black and white. The rainbow colors that you see here, they reserve specifically for Pride, and their plain faces. So you've seen whiteface come up quite a bit. The Australian order does not use whiteface makeup. The UK houses vary nowadays, and you may remember from the picture I showed you towards the beginning, there was one sister in plain face and two in whiteface, and that has to do with the UK houses originally being founded by the Australian houses, whereas the mainland Europe houses were founded by San Francisco, which had started wearing whiteface within a couple of years. The London house then faded out and was restarted by two sisters from France. And so now you've got both influences, particularly in the London house, although one of the sisters that was in that image is from the Edinburgh house. Sister Rowena comparing the traditional Australian habit and plain face with the San Francisco tradition of whiteface and party frocks, says, in terms of the reason why we present and manifest ourselves the way we do, it actually is a much, much stronger representation and far, in our opinions, greater parody of the foibles and failings of faith, particularly from the organized church point of view, that it be recognized for what it is by wearing something that's recognizable. So in our estimation, while we have the greatest of reverence and respect for our peers and colleagues over there in San Fran, something that those of us from San Francisco don't like to hear it called, with their whiteface, we feel it actually dilutes the message a little bit because it becomes almost a parody of a parody. It becomes more a case of high camp street theater with something that's almost recognizable as a nun because it's so close to the traditional, more recognizable genres of drag than it is a genre of parody of faith and religion. Part of my argument is that it's both, and that the different houses are either edging closer to the drag theme or closer to the nun theme, but that they're all engaging in this combination. And I keep saying I'm going to look at my timer and my phone keeps going off. Am I at about half an hour at this point, or a little, not even? All right, I'm going to keep going and just get out the hook, or give me a couple minutes if it's time to get out the hook. So the sisters also make it quite clear that they're not drag queens. So Sister Dinah Douche, again of the Abbey of St. Joan in Seattle, says the following. Generally, and Sister Dinah actually had a career as a drag queen prior to joining the sisters. This is not typical, but it was the case for Dinah. So she says generally a drag queen would be a gay male or a male dressing to imitate an actual woman. The sisters aren't all men. And then she goes on as though they are, so I'm presuming here that she's talking about the sisters who are men, would never gender identify as a woman or consider themselves as cross-dressing. They may wear female clothes, but it's more just part of the outfit and the fun of it all. A lot of sisters that have never been drag queens get offended when you call them drag queens because they're not out to look like women. They're not out to be women, they're out to be nuns. And this just happens to be how this particular set of nuns look. I'm cool either way, although even though I used to do drag, when people come up, hey, drag queens, it's not like I'm not a drag queen. I'm not in drag. I'm a sister right now. It's different. It's totally different. So one interesting clue to what's different is the sisters' emphasis on the anonymity of their secular selves and the function of that anonymity. So this is Sister Glow Your Own Way, again from the Seattle house, who in her secular self also does HIV outreach. And HIV outreach has been, it's not the only thing that the sisters do, but it has been the core, given that they were founded in '79 in San Francisco, where AIDS was first named and delineated. So Sister Glow says that whiteface, that habit, gives people permission to have those conversations with us in ways that they won't with regular civilian outreach workers. So I asked Glow why she thought that was, and she responded, "The sisters are playing a different role than an outreach worker. So it looks the same, but it's sort of a deeper level of work. I would describe us as the sort of sacred clowns, or that principle of the tricksters and the nuns of the community, whereas your outreach workers are just doing outreach. So while we may be doing outreach, we're also sort of going at deeper levels, and people resonate with that." As Sister Glow makes clear, although the trope of the nun that the sisters through the trope of the nun, the sisters invoke such concepts as trustworthiness, seriousness, earnestness, community service, and selflessness. And notice how gendered all of these concepts are, although that's another chapter, so I'm not going to elaborate on it here. For some, the sisters are a prophetic voice, and for some, they're also both a source and an expression of spirituality. And it's important to say that for others, they aren't. This is not a religious group. Some people find their religious expression through the sisters. So, as Hermana Prudencia Ernestina Simona Crucifija Cienfuegos of Montevideo, Uruguay puts it, and I'm translating this response to English. This interview was done in Spanish. "This, for me, is the most important thing, to know that the work we do in the field is recognized, because people don't think that this is only an outfit we wear for a moment. No, we're doing something serious. We're not doing this as mockery or a joke." The insistence on such seriousness, often at the very same time as something parodic is clearly taking place, is particularly evident in a story that Sister Soamai tells about the early years of the order. Sister Soamai recalls the event that I have pictured up here, and this is an image, I believe, from one of the gay newspapers in San Francisco at the time. Sister Soamai recalls this event as being the order's very first appearance in habit at a political protest. They were lending their support to lesbian and gay students at the University of San Francisco, a Roman Catholic institution. The students wanted the university to officially recognize their student organizations. After the protest ended, some members of the order decided to go to a jazz concert on campus. And so, as Sister Soamai told the story, "I went onto campus. Campus security tried to take a hold of me and stop me. And I said, 'Take your hands off, sister.' And he said it exactly that way. And another woman came up to me, a nun, and said, 'Why are you wearing my habit? You!' I said, 'Sister, you are wearing your habit. I am wearing my habit.' And I left her to deal with that, and sat down and listened to Cal Tjader play. And seeing the president of the university in the background being really fuming and upset that I'm there, sitting beside Father Flynn of the philosophy department, who says to me, 'Sister, we saw you from the colloquy room,' and the comment was, 'Well, at least they're wearing the habit.' And I laughed, and one of the gay people had brought me a Coke, and I offered Father Flynn a sip. And in true Jesuit fashion, remember this is the person who went to seminary, he kept the whole Coke. Sister was clearly not offering him a drink of her Coke. She was tending to his needs. But it was a fun afternoon. So Sister Soamai's story demonstrates particularly well that in addition to the clear aspect of gender fuck in the sisters, there's also what I've termed religion fuck going on. I had a sociologist of religion one time come up to one of my students after a presentation and say, "I've never heard that word used in a sociology of religion conference before. You need to get out more." So gender fuck is not about mocking gender necessarily, but about deconstructing the assumptions, challenging the assumptions that we make about gender, deconstructing the system of gender, performatively challenging and questioning gender. So I make the argument that there's something similar going on here with religion. So religion fuck, what the sisters are engaged in, is not in fact mocking religion, but performatively challenging our assumptions about what religion is, who can be involved in it, who can be a representative of it, who it's open to. So this is, again, kind of what I'm trying to get at with making the argument that there's a performative kind of activism going on here, and it's an activism not just around gender and sexuality, it's also an activism around religion. This, I think, is one reason why the sisters are only present in countries that are predominantly Christian, and why they don't seem to have taken off in countries with a very fervent Catholic culture. So I was mentioning yesterday that there is currently a mission in Dublin. It's very new, I believe as of last year. If it's a mission, it is of necessity new. But there are no sisters for instance, in Italy. There are no sisters elsewhere in South or Central America. So it's Christianity and kind of not intensely fervent Catholic culture that seems to be the combination where the sisters work the best and are welcomed the most, at least within their communities. This is an ad that the sisters placed in a gay newspaper in 1992, declaring what they called a queer holy war on Christian, and again I'm quoting, homophobia, AIDS phobia, bigotry, and misogyny. So if the sisters are serious about being nuns, then how do they make their case? I've heard four main arguments that are often intertwined. The first one is, we do the same work that the sisters do, and then there's a sort of implicit, but sometimes we do it better and we're way more fun. For those of you who are familiar with Christian theology, notice here the theological irony of the faith works distinction that the sisters are making. They're nuns because they do the work, therefore belief in Roman Catholicism, not necessary to be nuns. So this claim is often connected to a second claim where they implicitly or explicitly claim the moral high ground over Roman Catholicism. So here are, and particularly as regards Roman Catholic hierarchy's treatment of queer people and also, interestingly, of Roman Catholic nuns. So here are a couple of examples of that. The first one, both from Sisters in the Seattle House, the first from Sister Pureheart, and the second from Sister Maria Kafina Mocha Latte. You can guess what she likes to drink. So Sister Pureheart said, well, nuns do charity work, I do charity work. Help the poor, homeless, take confessions, listen to people, and try to give a little bit of advice that doesn't hurt anybody. But yeah, we do the same things as nuns, just not as formal, more for the queer community rather than just the Catholics, I guess, because Catholics can be a little uptight and not forgiving and not accepting or understanding about the gay community. So it's kind of a cool little mission to help my fellow gay men and women. Sister Maria says, and Sister Maria is a practicing Catholic, says in many ways it is not meant as disrespect. It's actually meant as almost an emulation. More of a, hey, nuns do these wonderful things. And I think half of our, and here Maria means Roman Catholic nuns, half of our nuns are on freaking welfare because it's not like the church doesn't support them like they support priests. Their orders have to support them. And most orders of women are not wealthy. They're just not, and they never have been. Another theme is spiritual or prophetic work, again, connecting that to sisters' perception of the work that nuns do. Reverend Sister Mary Peter, originally of Toronto, but a long-standing San Francisco sister by the time I interviewed her, has a particularly spiritual take on the work of the sisters. She told me, being a nun means hooking your boat to joy and then going out and doing good. And that is going to look different in every generation and every community. Earlier in the same interview, she linked the importance of joy to the oppression experienced by LGBTQ people. And she said that's why we talk about promulgating joy and not promulgating happiness. Happiness is easy, it's momentary, and it's based on a sugar high or a good cup of coffee or a quick fuck. Joy is hard won. Joy is what's left in the crucible after you throw in all the tears and all the anger and all the shame and you burn it at a high temperature for 5 hours. And what comes out is the luster of joy. I still get chills when I read this one. And if you're really willing to go there, okay, let's walk together on this. But no one said it was going to be easy, and it's not. Novice Sister Petunia Incarnata from the Vancouver House, also known as the Abbey of the Long Cedar Canoe, yes, it's pronounced that way, told me, I joined the Franciscans in South America where I was born, and I went to seminary, but it was too lonely for me. But I spent 6 months with them, and it was glorious, a glorious experience. So I've always had this attraction to the religious order, part of it. Of course, in the Catholic Church, I could if I could keep my mouth shut, but where's my integrity? So the sisters appeared in my life. I said it was just like perfect. This is my call to be a nun. A nun, what is a nun? A nun is a person that is consecrated to the service of something that is transcendent, for the love of your fellow human beings. But you're consecrated, so that's why I feel that I am. Yes, there's no doubt in my mind, I'm consecrated to the heart of God. Now, this is a more unusual perspective among the sisters, but Petunia is not the only one to tell me something like this either. Finally, the argument is made that the Roman Catholic Church has no monopoly on nuns. And then this last argument comes from Sister Chrissy Fiction, again from the Portland House. So Sister Chrissy, who has graduate degrees in the study of religion, says, the Roman Catholics, they haven't cornered the market on nuns. There's Episcopalian nuns, there's Buddhist nuns, and there's us. So there's all different kinds of nuns. I think that's the confusion, is that when you say the word nun in our society, people automatically think of Roman Catholic nuns, which we're not, obviously. Serious parody is also brought up in relation to the Roman Catholic hierarchy. I'm going to talk about this a little more briefly. There is an apocryphal story among the sisters that they delight in telling, that the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence are on the Vatican's official list of heretics. To the best of my knowledge, the Vatican has no official list of heretics. So what's particularly interesting is not only that this story is powerful and commonly told, but that it's apocryphal. So it wasn't like this happened and the sisters thought it was cool and told lots of people about it. Somewhere, someone said something about, we must be on this list, which doesn't appear to exist. And that was so important and so powerful that it got picked up. And I was told this repeatedly, even just walking down the street with sisters. Oh, you're a religious studies scholar. Well, we're on the official Roman Catholic, or sometimes they'll say papal, list of heretics. So that's the parody side. Again, like, hey, we're on the list of heretics. This is pretty cool. On the other side, so Roman Catholic hierarchy, not cool. We're delighted to be on the list of heretics. Roman Catholic nuns, their approval is very important. This also came up repeatedly, and again, without prompting from me. A number of sisters told me that these are quotes, revere or even glorify nuns, Roman Catholic nuns. And many told me, often without even tangential prompting, stories of Roman Catholic nuns, such as Sister Janine Gramick, who's pictured here, the co-founder of the LGBT-positive Roman Catholic New Ways ministry, and silenced by the previous pope, and then silenced about the silencing, but that's another story. So many of them told me these stories of Roman Catholic nuns offering approval to the sisters. The stories, as I mentioned, are extremely powerful in the order, and they also incorporated, again, this sense of moral high ground over the Roman Catholic hierarchy. So, for example, another sister from Seattle, Sister Glow Your Own Way, told me very forthrightly, nuns like us, priests don't. She continued, I think it's a recognition thing. Like, the women recognize you're filling the same role that we are. And as a group who's oppressed within the hierarchy, they get it. The priests, as the traditional male power authority figures, don't like it. We sort of subvert their hierarchy and their ways of looking at the world, and then they don't like that. I find profound joy in the fact that we're listed as official heretics. Having been raised Catholic, I'm like, yes, I've made it. So, final piece here, resolving the paradox. So then how does seriousness and parody work together? A key for me is offered by a very early member of the order, Sister Mary Media, during an interview with me. Sister Media said, I think maybe for some of the sisters, there is maybe an element of mocking. I'm not sure. I don't think for most sisters there is, but there is an element of camping. And this distinction between camp and mockery also offers the first clue to resonances between the sisters and the legacy that I was speaking about of other queer activist groups. Other sisters have made similar observations based on their own areas of familiarity. Several who have a background in theater and or protest have observed that the sisters' work is a form of street theater or performance art. A few of them with Roman Catholic backgrounds have likened the sisters to Roman Catholic tertiary orders. So even here, the seriousness of the vowed orders meets the parody of the street theater and the performance art. Sister Unity Divine, the last name referring not to deities but to the drag queen, is a professional actor and a performance artist in her secular life, and so I include her analysis here because I think it's particularly on point. Sister Unity said, fun and artifice and performative, and in a way, that's the lure. And then, you hook them, and then you give them the real, not the Zizekian real. Or maybe. And the sisters, from my conversations with some of the earliest sisters, that's what they've always known, is that the makeup not only delivers a message, but it attracts the crowds so that you can then, it's the spoonful of sugar, and then you can give them the medicine. Earlier in the interview, she kind of explained what the medicine is. If you can talk to me in grease paint, glitter, and drag, like I'm a real character, like I'm a real person, and relate to a drag nun as a real person, then in your neighborhood, when a 6-year-old with a penis tells you I'm a girl, then the doors of your mind are open enough that you might be able to say, well, it's nice to meet you, period. You know what I'm saying? You may be able to accept people for who they are as they are. And that is my personal mission, to make room in the world and let people know that there is room for them to be who they are as they are, with security, freedom from guilt, joy, and abundance of gifts to give back to the community. That's my mission. And I think that the trick of making people accept Sister Unity as a real thing, as a real person, is part of the core of how we do that. It's the magic trick. As I've said, I make the broader argument in the book that what the sisters are doing is one specific form of serious parody, and that this activist strategy may have broader applications, particularly in contexts where communities are opposed or oppressed by culturally significant traditions and organizations. For today, having gestured at that larger argument, I want to leave you with 2 final stories. The first takes place in Warsaw, where Europride was held in 2010. Sœur Rose of the Couvent de Paname in Paris, and this is Sœur Rose here, the sign, for those of you that don't speak French, the sign that, this is in a different march for trans rights, the sign that she's holding reads, degendered, not deranged. Sœur Rose had traveled to Warsaw with some of her sisters to take part in the parade, and I'll let her pick up the story from here in the quote that's on the screen. She says the Europride was not able to start because there were 200 fascist people blocking the parade, and the chief of the police was waiting to have the order to attack them to make them move. And of course, as it's Poland, the order was not coming. And they were like, no, we're not allowed to do anything to move because they are here, and as long as we are not allowed to fight them, we will not be able to start. I was in face, a term that the sisters use for being in habit. I was with Sister Aura from Berlin. I said, okay, Aura, come. She was way too afraid and stand back. And I decided to go there anyway. I passed the police line and I just stand in front of them in the Christ position, and here she gestured like this as she was talking to me, with my coronet and everything. And the Paname coronet really looks like the Catholic one from the order that was really important in France and in Poland too. So when they looked at me like this, it's really like they're coronets, Catholic ones. So Christ position, coronets, the guys were like so afraid. They did not know who they were fighting. Is that a drag queen? A man? A woman? A new kind of nuns? The Christ? They step back, and the Europride starts. And as the Abbey of St. Joan Sisters in Seattle say, and as the Abbey of St. Joan Sisters in Seattle say, in the words of Sister Dominatrix, well, honey, we do the same thing that the nuns do, you know? They take vows to support the community. We take vows to support the community. They take vows to feed the sick and the homeless and the dying. We take vows to feed the sick and the homeless and the dying. They take vows of chastity. We raise money for the community. Serious parody in a nutshell. Thank you. And I have references here for all the images, but I'll leave Sister Domine up instead. So I realize that we're well into our break time.
Oh, well, no, I mean, thank you so much, Melissa, for a second. Fantastic here. So isn't it a joy to have this keynote panel here. There's no rush, because we are a little bit flexible in the timing anyway. And the coffee will be kind of hot also in 20 minutes. So please, let's get on with questions, comments. Can we start with Stan and then Chris?
Yeah, I was interested in your list of heretics and how they use it as a justification for themselves. So when you correct them, which I assumed you did during the conversation, no, actually, you allowed that misconception to continue.
I don't think it's my role to teach the people that I'm working
Well,
with about religion.
It's a fact.
It's a fact that there isn't one?
It's a fact there isn't one, so...
Yeah, I'm sorry,
The question would have then continued.
Yeah.
How did they then react?
Right.
Well, you can't answer that.
No, I can tell you that I think it was Sister Glow, but I'm not certain off the top of my head. One of the sisters that I interviewed said, so we say we're on the official list of heretics, but I'm not so sure about that. And I grinned and I said, yeah, I'm not sure either, because I don't think it exists. And Sister Glow said, yeah, I don't think so either. And then we kind of went on from there. But so, I mean, the sort of larger context for this is that there's an interesting, being a Star Trek fan, there's an interesting kind of like non-interference clause sort of with religion, with religious studies. I know, I'm such a nerd. This is an interesting ethical problem for religious studies, right? So on the one hand, it's not my job really in learning from people about their practices to say, well, but actually that's wrong. And so my default is always just to listen and learn and to ask clarifying questions, but not to challenge, unless I know that there's something that unless a challenge is part of a clarifying question, like, okay, so I know that other people who aren't in this tradition aren't going to get this. Can you help me understand how it works for you? That, of course, leads to some really challenging paradoxes when you're working with people in homophobic traditions who have absorbed some of that homophobia, and where do the ethics lie there? But that's, again, I think a bigger question.
Chris?
I'd like to talk to you about two words that you used.
Yes.
And sort of just play around with them a little bit. The first is work. Because you were talking about faith and work. I was also, and I know a couple of the sisters who used to be in the London Order. And what I find from what the sisters do is that they make difficult work fun. And you kept saying it, in their secular life, they, generally speaking, are working very difficult jobs. But when they're in faith, then they are doing the same thing, as you said, but more fun.
Yes.
And I love this idea that work can be fun.
Yes.
I adore my job.
Yeah.
And when I hear somebody who says, oh, I really don't like my job, I feel so sad for them. And that for me, what the sisters say to me is enjoy your job, which is why I love what you were talking about when you were talking about joy and happiness. I know we were talking about happiness yesterday, so I don't agree with what you said about happiness. I think happiness should be something that's I read happiness the way you read joy.
Well, that's what Sister Mary Peter said about happiness. So.
The other word I want to pick you up on is, again, not picking you up on, it's just widening your experience. The word you used, emulation. Yeah. Can I read you 2 lines of a poem that was written in 1703 by Sarah Figg Edgerton? Say, tyrant custom, why must we obey the impositions of thy haughty sway? That's what emulation is. The poem is called The Emulation. It's one of the earliest feminist poems that was ever written. And it's just emulation. If you look at the history of emulation, it is breaking tyrant custom. It's as queer. Emulation is queer.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you very much.
More questions, comments? Yes, Rohit.
A really interesting presentation. I've enjoyed it. I think I will pick up on Sister Vishnu, who you said used the word Ardhanarishvara, and you also have Maya Funani. Now, Funani is a colloquial word for vagina in Hindi. I'm wondering, is there a lot of these non-Western contextual kind of appropriation that happens? Because, I mean, I didn't see any people of color there amongst them, so I'm quite interested in how that.
Yeah. So I think that's actually two pieces. Let me take the second one first. Yeah, so again, the issue of race and particularly settler colonialism, because of this evocation of the figure of the quote-unquote sacred clown, which ties into particularly North American, but it's very definitely spread around the world, particularly white appropriation of Native North American sort of colonialist histories of Native North America and trying to read underneath them and sort of leading to this white argument that, you know, prior to Christianity, all indigenous cultures thought gay people were great and we were all shamans. And so there's a huge piece there. There are sisters of color. They're very definitely underrepresented relative to the population in any given city where they are. That's for a number of reasons. It has in part to do with the racial divisions in queer communities in general. So the sisters are starting out predominantly white, they're working, and male, I should say, and they're working with predominantly white, male, and cis communities as well. So part of it is just like, why would I want to be working, you know, for that community when my community needs my support? And part of it is kind of, at the same time, the sisters that are aware of that and think it's a problem also don't want to just like pop up in a community where they may not be welcome, and so there's kind of there's the challenge on that level. For a number of sisters of color, the whiteface poses a problem, and they work with it in different ways, but sisters of color almost across the board immediately and without. I asked a very open-ended question because I was curious. I kind of thought there might be an issue here, and so I simply asked in all my interviews, what's it like to wear whiteface? And sisters who identified as white said things like itchy, hot, talked about the importance of the anonymity, it's a blank canvas. I got all kinds of really symbolic and some just sort of basic, you know, physical things about it. Almost to a person, the sisters of color talked about it being racialized and about being whitewashed by wearing the whiteface. And so how do you navigate that? What do you do with it? And they all had different ways of approaching it. In terms of the use of references, use of Hindi terms and references to Hinduism, this I think is coming particularly strongly. So it's not hugely widespread. I'm trying to think of, I actually can't think of other references other than Sister Vish and Sister Maya, because the sister who uses Vishnu and spells it Vish-Knew, is also the sister who originally used Ardhanarishvara. But that's routing. I'm not sure about Maya because she didn't say sort of where she learned the term, just that because she's a female-bodied sister, she wanted a sort of sly reference to being a female-bodied sister because there aren't that many. But I know that for Sister Vish has been for many, many years, and even starting right around the time that the sisters started, has been a practitioner of transcendental meditation, which is you can either call it a movement appropriated from Hinduism or a spin-off movement, but you know, the U.S., like the UK, got absolutely enamored starting in the late 19th century with Hinduism and Buddhism, even if they didn't really understand them and couldn't always tell them apart. And so there are a lot of new religious movements that have come up out of that, and Vish is a practitioner of one of them. Oh, unity. Although unity does not dress in orange as a reference to Hinduism, she told me that it's sort of, you know, it was sort of fortuitous that it happened. Unity, when I first met her many, many years ago in the middle of doing another research project, shook my hand, said, "Hello, nice to meet you, I'm Hindu," and turned around and walked off. Unity is very much white, and a practitioner of another one of the Hindu-based new religious movements. And her name actually is a translation to English of a spiritual name that she was given. So that's there, and it's kind of part of the queer community turning to alternative religions, which Hinduism is in these new religious movement forms for white folks in the U.S. because of the homophobia in the Christianity that most of them have been raised in. So long answer, but that's, yeah.
More comments, question? If people want to have a coffee. I have a comment.
Yes, please.
And that is, it's brilliant how self-narration and stories become
There's my 45 minutes. That can't be.
come into play with these self-perpetuating myths, like we are on the list on Parody. But of course, what you have in the Catholic Church is the possibility to get officially your excommunication stated. So people say you never get excommunicated because canonical law is far too haughty to excommunicate you. But the canonical law would actually look at you and say, well, unfortunately, your actions have excommunicated yourself, and we just publish that. So that is a possibility. It's quite hard because they're actually a bit hesitant about publishing that anymore. Yeah, but if you do if you push a little bit, like I did in the end of the 80s, you get actually a letter from your bishop which states that your actions have excommunicated. And you can frame it and
You can also
wear it as a badge
request it.
of honor, and you can make it a part of your own self-mystification and narration of your own histories, that you carry with you with some sort of pride and a little parodic, maybe a parodic glints in your eyes. So that is a wonderful thing. I love that about the sisters, this story.
There actually are a few sisters I've spoken with who were raised Catholic who requested excommunication.
Kind of like I did. So
just to add something sort of illustrative of exactly what you said, when the same-sex marriage bill was being debated in Argentina in 2010, one priest from the middle of the country, very left-wing priest, came out supporting the bill, and he was stripped of his priesthood in a week.
Mm-hmm.
In a week. We have had like 2 or 3 priests over the last 10-15 years being found guilty of abusing minors by the court of law in the country, serving terms in jail for that, and they still have the right to give mass. That press actually picked on that, because it took a week since the guy came out on the press to say that he was in favor of the bill because this was a secular matter, nothing to do with religion. The bishop of his diocese stripped him of his priesthood, put together a tribunal, and stripped him of people in a matter of a week.
yeah. Well, on this somber note, coffee.
Back to Parody.